Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to 50 or so individuals joining us in person in Sydney CBD. I'm told reliably as many as 800 individuals joining us online, and of course to our expert panel. My name's Sean Emery. I'm Senior Vice Dean, Research and Operations in the Faculty of Medicine and Health, UNSW. I'm really delighted to be hosting our third MedConnect event for 2022. Diseases, uniting genetics and breakthrough medicines. In Australia, a disease is considered rare if it affects less than 5 in 10,000 people. A paradox is that despite the rarity, the conditions represent a significant burden of disease across the whole population. Moreover, compared to more common health issues, there has typically been limited traction for research to advance our understanding of root causes, the identification of new treatments and approaches for people afflicted by these conditions. For those people, this means the path to diagnosis can be long, the treatments can be difficult to access, prohibitively expensive, or indeed in many instances at this stage, non-existent. Researchers both at UNSW and further afield are leveraging advances in genetic technology to improve diagnosis and treatment for patients with these rare diseases. Tonight, we'll be speaking with two thought leaders in this field, who we hope, and I'm sure they will shine a light on current research, challenges, and recent breakthroughs that have all been enabled by the dedication of the individuals working in this space. I can say with some confidence that there is indeed at this stage hope. Before we begin, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the unceded lands on which we're holding this meeting, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend a particular welcome to any Australia First Nations people present, either in the room this evening or indeed the broader community online. And by extension, acknowledge the elders past and present of all the tribes on the lands of people where people are taking this meeting from. I encourage you to please send your questions for the panel via Slido, another piece of new technology. The hashtag for the event is #MedConnect. Through Slido, you can also upvote other people's questions, and that will help us prioritise the order in which they're presented to the panel. A reminder also that this webinar will be recorded and made public following the session. Those of you joining us in person, please do switch off your mobile phones if you haven't already done so. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our speakers for the evening discussion. Firstly, Tegan Taylor, the ABC's Health and Science reporter, facilitating the discussion during the course of the evening. Tegan is joined by Michelle Farrer, an Associate Professor in Paediatric Neurology at UNSW Medicine and Health, and a specialist in child neurology at Sydney Children's Hospital. Her approach, particularly to spinal muscular atrophy, a previously untreatable disease that paralysed infants, has tailored healthcare to the individual with translations of several gene and molecular therapies to transform health outcomes. These babies are no longer paralysed and no longer die. I also welcome Nicole Millis, the Chief Executive Officer of Rare Voices Australia. Qualified originally as a social worker, Nicole has a personal and professional experience in the rare disease sector and over 12 years direct experience in advocacy for rare disease activities and communities. And this is a particular focus regarding treatments, their development, and how these valuable new molecules are accessed. Under Nicole's guidance, Rare Voices Australia has led the development of a national strategic action plan for rare diseases, the first nationally coordinated effort to address rare diseases in Australia. Welcome, and thank you for joining us once again. I'll now hand over to Tegan, who will facilitate our discussion. Thank you, Tegan.
Thank you, Sean, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. As Sean said, please send your questions through to Slido using the hashtag MedConnect. I'll remind you a few times throughout the discussion, but first in best asked, I guess, if you are going to use that tool. So, Nicole, let's start with a bit of a definition. We did hear a bit from Sean before, but rare diseases aren't that rare. So tell us about where the numbers fall.
Yeah, sure. So as Sean said, the most generally accepted definition is that a disease is rare if it impacts or affects less than 5 in 10,000 people. There's also around 7,000 different rare diseases, and so within each rare disease there's great variation, and there's great variation within those, between those different rare diseases as well. But the number that's probably been potentially giving Rare Voices Australia a bit of traction with some of the policymakers is that it impacts on 2 million Australians when you bring them all together. And I say to lots of people that often when I speak about rare diseases, we start with the numbers, but really the most important thing are those common themes. So I obviously meet lots of different people with lots of different rare diseases. I certainly don't know them all, but when I start to hear about their stories and we go, yeah, that's a rare disease, we know that story. So there's much more commonalities, and that gives us the opportunity to make a difference.
And now's a really good time to be talking. I mean, every day is a good day to be talking about rare diseases, but now is a particularly good time with the emerging technology that's happening and the UN resolution that sort of came through about a year ago. Michelle, do you want to talk us through what that's about and what it kind of sets the scene for, especially here in Australia?
Sure. So following on from the numbers, it's not just numbers, it translates into the impact and the burden of rare diseases. They're difficult to diagnose, they're complex, and they also have a huge burden for the person living with the rare disease, but also their whole family. And that's because a lot of them are very severe and debilitating. 80% are genetic, they have onset in childhood, and in fact 60% of childhood deaths are due to a rare disease. And when you take all those numbers and you put it on the world stage, it's a global health priority. It's not the problem of any one nation. So all 193 members of the United Nations signed a resolution in November last year calling for progress in rare diseases. And it was progress in care so that every single person was able to access effective, appropriate, equitable care and support, as anybody deserves. But linked with that, it was, well, they need to be able to have opportunities to participate in research, because that's where it brings hope, to develop effective therapies. So part of the UN resolution, which was driven by the community, by the people living with rare diseases, was let's work together. Let's create a global network of experts, networks of multidisciplinary care, and also share our knowledge and share our research so that we can really harness it and have an impact for everybody. So we don't want to work by ourselves anymore. We want to work together.
Absolutely. And we'll dig into that in a little bit, but I'd like to talk a bit about kind of the status quo. When you bring them all together, they are affecting a lot of people, but they're by definition individually quite rare, which means that doctors don't always know what they're seeing when they first see it. What's the typical pathway to diagnosis like at the moment? What's it been like in the past?
So delays in diagnosis is very common, and misdiagnosis is extremely common. So I often, so my personal experience is that I'm a mum of a young adult now living with a rare disease. And often when people talk about diagnostic delay, they say they wait for a diagnosis, but that's a very passive term. And they don't wait for a diagnosis. They go searching to different doctors. They get poked and prodded. They get given a diagnosis and they have to adjust their whole lives to what they think that is, only to be told, well, no, it's not that. And I think potentially some of our most vulnerable parts of our rare disease community are those that will remain undiagnosed for a really substantial piece of time. And how do you cope with that as a family? How do you plan for the future? I know when my son was diagnosed, I actually ended up with more questions than I had before. So it gives you some answers, but then gives you 20 million more questions, and it's really quite challenging. And I was smiling when Sean read out my bio because it makes me sound very professional. And but really, at the start of it, I was as a mum of a child with rare disease, whose son was deteriorating, and I knew that there was a treatment overseas, but it wasn't in Australia, and I didn't understand why that was. And I think there's a naivety that is really useful, and I think often it's that uninformed naivety that actually helps drive a lot of the change. So I very naively rang a pharmaceutical company and said, when's the medicine coming to Australia? And they said 18 months, and I thought, and this shows how naive I was, I thought that's a really long time. In rare disease, it is not a long time. And they started explaining all these things to me that didn't make any sense. They talked about the PBAC, they talked about the TGA, they talked about the LSDP, all these bunch of letters, and I didn't quite understand it. And I said, but what can I do to make it quicker? Because that's not quick enough. And I had someone on the phone who I'd never met with say, lobby government. So that's what I did, not knowing what I was doing, but pretty confident that I'd learn on the way. And I think that's actually a really important experience and common experience in rare disease. We often feel like we're the learner and the teacher at the same time. So you're learning about the disease that your family is affected by. At the same time, you're teaching doctors about it, that you're teaching your schools about it the whole time. And that's a real interesting place and challenging place to be.
As the person on the other end of that, what's that relationship like with a patient that's coming to you, talking to you? Are you learning from them as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with everything Nicole says, and that's why we're here. We want change. We want to be able to diagnose people in a quick way, in an accurate way, to stop that uncertainty. But inevitably, less than 5% of rare diseases currently have effective therapies. So the families are left with what next? What do I do? And if we haven't ever seen the disease before, it's very difficult to know. And this is where the action plan is so important nationally, to have knowledge and to share that.
So we've got the National Strategic Action Plan for Rare Diseases. Can you just talk us through what the sort of main points of that is, Nicole?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the most important thing is that it's an Australian government policy framework, and it's got the support of all parties. And that's really quite important. But the way it was developed was very much by the sector, for the sector. So it had quite an extensive multi-stakeholder consultation process. So we had people living with rare disease, advocates, clinicians, researchers, government, and industry all contributing. And I think that's what we know in the rare disease sector. There's often no ready solutions or no clear solutions that we know the right thing to do. So that's why we need to sort of hear from everybody to come up with the most robust solutions, or at least a way forward. So the action plan is it's set around 3 pillars: so awareness and education, care and support, and research and data. Now, anyone that knows rare disease knows that they are all interrelated. And I often say, or anyone that listens really, that the only way to get the best care in rare disease is to embed both awareness and education and research into it. So we need to look at, I think what the action plan helps is to gives us a language to start talking about bringing those things together, and gives us a framework or a scaffolding to hang our activities on.
Is anywhere doing it really well, that sort of embedding, co-locating sort of thing?
We're starting to see some really good examples. One of the things that we heard time and time again when we did the stakeholder consultation for the action plan was that everyone worked in silos. that of course our health system doesn't lend it. It's very fragmented. It's very federated, so it doesn't lend itself to that. So we really have to start looking, and we're starting to see it now. You're seeing more things like even research proposals that are at a national level that are working together, and even things. Well, one of the examples would be the rarest project that's led by the University of New South Wales, which is quite an innovative model. So it's the University of New South Wales, but also the University of Western Australia, Macquarie Institute, and also Rare Voices Australia as the peak body. So I think we need to look for those opportunities to work better together, and not just talk about collaborating because it sounds nice, not just talk about co-design or consumer input because we have to now, but actually look at really tangible and more sophisticated ways of doing that.
How does that model compare to what it was like when you started out in this space?
I think initially starting, you're early in your career as well, and you're learning from your colleagues, but you are working in silos. But for me, I started working in one specific rare disease. You mentioned spinal muscular atrophy, and there was no one else in Australia researching it. So it really was turning to overseas to learn and share knowledge, and the way that I developed my own research and knowledge was actually working with people who weren't working in that disease and learning those skills and adapting them to spinal muscular atrophy. So I think, in fact, some of the best ideas as we developed the research program and rolled out treatments came from my patients and my families. And in fact, when we started talking about, well, actually we can treat you, I thought, well, this is great, they're going to be really happy. But in fact, that's not, they said, this is not what we want. Why are you telling us this now? Why didn't you tell us before? And it really gave me the idea, actually, there's more to this than just treating. It's about empowering families for them to take action. And so I think I had a very bad week in clinic one week where I diagnosed one family with spinal muscular atrophy, which is a motor neuron disease that paralyses children and they don't survive till their second birthday. And I diagnosed two brothers with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is another paralysing muscle disease. And to this day, I still remember that dad punching a hole in the wall of that outpatient clinic and going, how did this happen? How weren't we warned? And it was that moment and that week where the family said, we need to do something better. And I thought I had the treatment, and that was it, that I went, you're right. And the idea was, let's diagnose earlier, let's give families choices. So it's not just about one focus, it's taking a whole comprehensive focus and listening to what people need. And those differences are really important. Some people will want treatment, some people will want choice, and it's listening to those differences, empowering people and working together has really broadened my mind and my research. And so now I get up in the morning and I love working with the most diverse group of people. I'm working with ethicists, I'm working with lawyers, because when you think about new therapies, the legal system needs to change. You need to think about health economics. You need to make sure that it's appropriate and it's acceptable for the community. So you need to be taking a whole approach, thinking about a big picture and putting all the puzzle pieces together, because that's really the way that it's going to be acceptable and sustainable.
With Michelle talking about that moment of kind of being like, here, the treatment, here you go, like, and that not being what the patient wanted, how does that kind of gel with your experience or people that you're talking to?
Look, I think most certainly there is, just as the disease are complex, people that are living with the diseases are complex and are different and have different expectations. They also have different risk appetites, and I think that's a real area that as a general sector we haven't explored very well, or we don't know much about. And even within, I think the other thing which is often missed as well is that will vary even within the one individual family or even within the one individual over their time, over their journey of life, really. So I know even for me, I have made very different choices regarding things like reproduction or treatment options or priorities at different points in my life. And there's no right or wrong, but we need to be able to, I think, hear those differences and be okay about those differences. And sometimes, I said before that I think a lot of the big change in the sector has been through patient or consumer-led advocacy, but we had a National Rare Disease Summit on the weekend, and one of the points I made, which I think is really important, is that for all of us, when we're in this space, to become more nuanced in our language, including consumer advocates, and to make sure that that in our effort to get our message through or to simplify messaging, that we're actually not diluting the complexity. And I think that's even a more of a reason why we need to get those different voices and different strengths and different expertise, and to make sure that we're constantly checking in with each other and that everyone's stories are being heard.
What kind of nuances do you mean?
So, well, getting back to Michelle's example, not everybody wants treatment. Not everyone wants to go on a clinical trial. And there might be a whole lot of reasons for that. It may be because they have 2 children with a condition and they can only get one on. It may be that the disease has progressed past or has progressed, and so maybe the outcomes aren't going to be the outcomes that are important to them. And I think that's, it also might be just the difficulties and logistics of doing a clinical trial and signing up for a clinical trial, and how do you manage that against sort of your life with either other parts of your other family members. So there's actually a whole lot of different things. But Michelle did say, you said a word before, uncertainty. So I often say that the biggest theme, for want of a better word, in rare disease is uncertainty, and we all have our different levels of how much uncertainty we can manage.
But I think what you're describing is also the art of medicine, and it's art meets science. And to me, I just have this moment of, aha, that's precision medicine. It's that we can offer a targeted therapy, but it's targeted to what the family need most and what's acceptable to them. And it may not be the whiz-bang drug, it might be the support and the choice and what's happening in their environment and what they need at that time. And that's why the technology is really important, but it's the people as well.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about therapies and let's talk about treatments, because I think probably a lot of people are interested in them as well. What's the pipeline look like?
So, as I said, less than 5% currently have effective therapies, but there are some molecular therapies that are highly effective, and I think they give hope. And I mean, my own work is a very visible, exciting example of that. So
talk us through that with spinal muscular atrophy.
So spinal muscular atrophy was one of those conditions that you knew the baby had it and your heart just sank, because that day was the best day you were ever going to see that child, and they were going to get weaker and weaker. And in 2014, I treated my first child on a clinical trial, and in fact, I saw her yesterday, and she chased me around the ward, which was just incredible, in her wheelchair. And the reason for that is because she was picked up after she had symptoms. She had that delay in diagnosis, and the treatment is effective. but it's effective based on where she was at the time of her diagnosis.
So it halts it,
Yes.
which is incredible.
And it does improve, but
yeah.
it doesn't ameliorate completely. But in the family's eyes, that is the most meaningful outcome in the world to them. They cherish every moment with her, and she is very, very funny. But really, I think I'm one of those people where I say, well, that's really good, but what can I do better? And I listen to my patients and they give me the ideas. And it was really obvious that we needed to diagnose these children earlier. And at the time, I actually went across to the newborn screening lab in 2016 and I spoke to them and I said, I want to do newborn screening for genetic disease. And they went, right, okay, no. And I said, okay, what do I need to do?
Taking a step back, what would that actually involve? Like, what are you actually asking for from a newborn baby, and what happens with that sample?
So every baby that's born is screened for severe treatable conditions where if they're diagnosed early, the treatment will give them the best outcome for the best health status. And I knew that this is what I needed to do, but they weren't ready. And I said, well, what do I need to do to convince you? And they said, well, how much does it cost to treat? What do people think about it? What's the experience? What's the burden? So I spent my 3 years of postdoc answering all those questions, and then I went back to them. I said, how about now? And in fact, it was a cast of thousands. And at the time that we had that conversation and the answer was yes, let's think about it as a research study and as a pilot, there were only 2 other states in the world that were thinking the same, the New York City state and Taiwan. We were the 3rd place in the world to start this, and we linked it with a therapy. And in fact, a very new gene therapy trial where if you wrap the missing gene up in a virus, a non-pathogenic, doesn't cause disease, harmless virus with a postcode to the motor neuron on it, like a zip code, it gives you the address book. It will give you the missing gene. And really, it was through those 2 projects working synergistically that we were able to prove that if we treated early, we would be successful. And in fact, today we treated our 36th kid in Australia through this approach. And that kid was 5 days old.
Oh my gosh.
And that kid was actually identified in another state because they had a sibling that died of SMA. They rang me on Friday and they said, our baby came early. I said, can you get in the car and drive to Sydney? And the mum who'd just given labour packed her car and drove to Sydney and got her treatment. And that baby has the hope of not developing symptoms and growing up to be healthy. So that's an exciting example of what we can achieve with technology by understanding the root cause of disease and by developing, testing and delivering treatments. We can change and transform the outcomes for these children. But we can also transform the outcomes for their family. And part of our work, and it was working across a large team, and I need to acknowledge that, is that we needed to prove it was the right thing to do. So we knew that if we started, we couldn't stop. The day we stopped newborn screening was going to be a bad day. So all our research was geared at sustaining this. We asked every parent that was affected by the program, did you want this? Would you accept it? Would you want it to continue? They all said yes. In fact, they all said, why isn't it happening elsewhere? Make it bigger. And we actually also looked at the health outcomes, and we also looked at the functioning of newborn screening. We had to develop the model of care because we'd never done it before. And we also had to look at the health economics of it to prove that we weren't going to break the budget of the health system. And we got the most remarkable answer. By identifying the babies and actually giving them what is considered an expensive therapy, because it's a single therapy, it's not a chronic therapy that goes forever, we actually saved the health system money. There's not much that does that, okay? But now what I would like to do is use this as an example to have greater progress for the thousands of other people that are waiting for their turn.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent who's been through something like that, what's it like? I mean, I know you hear stories like this all the time, but blinking very hard to not cry listening to that. What's it like for you?
Look, it's just amazing. I mean, they completely change. We often at Rare Voices Australia, we get very excited about policy, and people look at you like you're a bit strange. But the reason we get excited about policy is that it transforms people's lives. So policy decisions regarding what Australia is going to research actually transforms people's lives. What funding, what medicines they're going to fund completely transforms people's lives. And I've known that since my son was able to get his medicine. Completely transformed his life. It completely changed his career outlook. It completely changed a whole lot of things. And the reason why I get so excited by policy and the action plan is that that's how we get equity, and that's how we start to get consistency, and that's how we give families and patients, and there'll still be uncertainty, but there'll be different levels of uncertainty, and there'll be different choices that they make. There'll be, it won't be, what do we do when there's no treatment? There'll be, oh look, there's a choice of treatment, which one suits me? There'll still be uncertainty, it will still be difficult, but it will be a whole different ball game. So that's what I feel when I hear, because I know that's a real that's a real sort of game changer. And what I want to see is for us all to keep working to have those continued game changer, because there's not going to be, as Michelle said, there's not going to be one solution that fixes everything. We're going to need a suite of solutions, and then we're going to keep having to raise the bar, and that's a great thing. That's exciting.
But that equity thing that you raise is so important, because we like to talk about how we have a universal healthcare system in Australia, and we could talk about that another time, but you had the resources and the education to call and to ask those questions and to do all those sorts of things. So many people don't.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that's probably that guilt probably is why I'm still working in that space, because and also that reliance on having to do something amazing. We shouldn't have to do something amazing. People living with rare disease and their families have got enough on their plate. So I have this ongoing battle, because if you hear what I often say is that I will call for rare disease champions, and we will celebrate them, because we need those champions to keep going. And it would be just so nice if it wasn't always the patients that had to be those rare disease champions. And so that's why I get really excited about when I see universities look at the action plan and go, oh, let's just do some tweaks. We're already doing, quite a bit of rare disease work, but we're not really recognising it, or we're not flying the flag. That's one of the other things I often say I do, is really just tell people or highlight to people all the good work that they're already doing, but they haven't quite connected all the dots together. So I think that's probably where I'm at in my personal journey, where I was very much the crazy mum, and a shout out to all those crazy mums, because they do amazing things. But we don't want to have to rely on those crazy mums, and how can we do, I get really excited when I see people like Michelle and a whole lot of other champions, because there are rare disease champions. You just have to look sometimes a little bit harder. But we've got rare disease champions in government, we've got rare disease champions in research, and rare disease champions in the clinical setting. And so often what I think my biggest thing that I can bring is to bring all those clever people together and put them in a room and let them solve the world.
But sort of coming back to the equity question, it's very important, and there's huge inequities in accessing health systems, diagnosis and treatment. And I think my own experience of the genomic technologies in being able to deliver a timely diagnosis is wonderful. Newborn screening is a point in case. It did not matter where you lived what language you spoke or where you were born, you got the same diagnosis. And I'd never ever seen that before as a neurologist. I was able to pick up the phone after talking to newborn screening and call someone in Broken Hill, and also talk to someone who spoke Arabic, who then found their other daughter who spoke English to me, and then I said, get to hospital and I'll get an interpreter for you. But there was no way they could have accessed healthcare. And those babies, I can only think how delayed their diagnosis would have been, because they wouldn't have engaged in healthcare the same way as a white Anglo-Saxon person living in central Sydney would have been able to. So we can use technologies to provide equity. And I think a great example is the work that Emma Palmer's doing with the Undiagnosed Diseases program. It's a national collaborative network where they're looking at those families that have that inequity, that have been so difficult to diagnose. And in fact, it's those ones that they're going to focus their energy on and their research, and they're going to focus it by using the experts around Australia to get those difficult diagnoses, to give those families hope. So that's just wonderful. But part of the way they're doing that is with all these new technologies. They're using artificial intelligence to analyse so much data. And in fact, it's being linked with work at the Garvan Institute, where they're sequencing normal populations to get reference data, because a lot of the genomic reference data that we have is not for these people that can't access healthcare. We don't know what a genome of someone who is a First Nations person is, and it's not going to be the same. There's going to be differences. We need those reference sets. So we need big data, we need artificial intelligence, we need biotechnology to be able to really harness this and get these efficiencies in the health system, and to do it differently, to be able to get equitable diagnosis for people.
So just a reminder that you can ask, you in the room, you listening from wherever you are over the internet, can ask a question via Slido. The hashtag is MedConnect. And you mentioned the action plan before, and I just thought I'd sort of weave in a question or two as we were going, because someone who, question I've now lost, was basically saying that I've lost the question, but I can remember it. They were saying the action plan's 2 years old now. What changes it made so far? Are there changes to it that need to be made?
So it's actually made quite a bit of change. We just, as I said, we've just had a summit where that's what we looked at, and we were starting to measure the progress. So what we've seen, I mean, there's been some initial government grants from that, and that's mostly been around the awareness and education pillar. But we're also seeing the I told someone once, you know, the easiest way, and I didn't realise this when we were putting the action plan together, but it has been so useful in influencing, as a government policy document, in influencing other government policy. So things like the National Medicines Policy is being reviewed at the moment, and I saw the final or the final draft, and it references that it aligns with the National Strategic Action Plan for Rare Diseases. We see it in research proposals. We see it in a whole range of different things. There's now we're starting to see local health districts looking at how they're responding to the action plan within their local health district. We see it within, at the summit we had a whole range of speakers from the Gov and from here and from WA around how they're embedding the action plan within their services. So I think we had a comment. We had a lot of Department of Health people actually at the summit, and one of them pulled me aside, and she's from the chronic care team, and they're the ones, there's actually quite a number of action plans from different disease areas, and she said to me, the rare disease sector is the only sector that has actually embraced their action plan and continues to use it as a guide and is really engaged with it. She said all the other areas have sort of, they did the work and they maybe did, got some things from it, they've put it on the shelf. So that's certainly been, I think, really important to continue that focus. But, we see things like targeted calls for rare diseases now in research that weren't there before, and most definitely came from advocacy. And again, that naivety I spoke of before, I still am quite naive, I think, sometimes. And I remember when I spoke to one of the researchers that got one of those grants, and he said it's amazing because we've been working so long at this by ourselves, it's all very lonely, and now finally there's some recognition and we can keep going. So I think the progress has come in all different ways, and I think it's also given everyone a little word that you use, which I'm always a bit careful about using, but a sense of hope and a sense of positivity and a sense that we can actually make a difference, and I think that's really important.
As a researcher, why is a document like that useful or important to you?
It's very important because it puts the people living with rare disease front and centre. And I think everything we need to do needs to be based on meeting their needs. And I think getting people living with rare disease to set the agenda and to drive it is the way it needs to be. So it's a living document, it's very rich, it's very important. And in fact, when I sit down, I think, what am I going to do? Referring to that document to make sure it's aligned with what needs to happen and it's not esoteric and irrelevant is very important, because as researchers, I know we can be criticised to be irrelevant, but as a university, we don't want to be. We want to be focused on change and for the good of society and contributing. So it's very important that we keep that front and centre.
I know that you just said you sort of shy away from using the word hope, but what is, well, actually, no, let's talk about it for a second. It's
not that I think it's been a bit, I have nothing against hope, let me be really clear. I'm a big fan of hope. I think sometimes though, it has been used in a fairly, can be used in a fairly sort of patronising, tokenistic way to perhaps minimise consumer knowledge or from that patient perspective. Mm-hmm. It's also been used often with the words false hope and a way of being told. So I would much prefer, I think there are other terms that we can use in other contexts. So, and I will make sense in a minute. But so health technology assessment. So that's the process where we decide, where the government decides what medicines or devices or tests will be funded. Often in that setting, and I work in that setting as well, we'll be told, hope can be used as a way to say, well, yes, we've heard the patient input, but perhaps they've got some false hope, or perhaps they don't understand. What would be much more useful than the words hope would be things like continuous improvement. It would be things like valuing innovation, those sorts of things, which has that hope aspect to it, but actually grounds it in something that's a bit more tangible. So I don't know if that helps explain it, but I think I'm a real fan of continuous improvement and how we can keep progressing and keep aiming high.
Well, let's talk about that. So we've talked about spinal muscular atrophy as a case study of what has worked really well in the past. That's just one. What's coming up over the horizon for other rare diseases?
It's a very active space. If you look at just gene therapies, there's 18 clinical trials alone in paediatric nerve and muscle diseases, and over 1,000 clinical trials for rare diseases, and that's enormous. Now, not every one of them will be successful, but what it does say to me is that this is an active space, And we need an army to be ready for it, because we want to make sure that we're delivering it in a safe way that is effective. And I think safety is front and foremost in everything we do. So clinical trials are important. But just looking at the tsunami of therapies that are coming, I think it really highlights the ongoing unmet need. And I think the fact of a rare disease is by its nature that a clinical trial gives hope to some people, but there are limited numbers on a clinical trial, and we need to broaden the access to therapies and to be continuing to develop new therapies. And I think it won't just have an impact for rare diseases, it will have an impact across the health system. There will be circumstances where it works for more common diseases as well. And it will also, I think, prevent low value care, care that doesn't work, that can be harmful as well. So I think what's coming down the pipeline is lots of new therapies in development that need to be tested and then delivered into a health system in a safe and effective way. We also need the health technology assessments to be able to cope with that and to fund them in an affordable way. So we're going to need new ways of thinking about how to deal with this that's acceptable to society. So you can see immediately this is no longer focused on just medicine, it's bringing in other broader aspects of the sector and working inter-agency. So it's going to be a busy time.
Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I think politicians in particular can get really excited, as we all should, about the medical, the science part of it. And I think, and I think we're at the edge of, if we don't move quickly with some of to make sure our infrastructure is ready, to make sure our systems are ready, we're actually going to miss out on this opportunity. But as Michelle has said, not only do we need the wonderful medical science and the breakthrough technology, but we actually need the workforce that's able to deliver that care. We need people to be able to get to where that specialist care is. We need the policy to help with the funding of that. We need the treatment to be or the therapies to be funded so that it's accessible, and we need to know that it's safe. And so one of the things that we're really that we're finding out, not just with gene therapy but with sort of rare disease care more broadly, is that there's some real basics that are missing. There's some real basics across the healthcare system around data collection. We don't know where everyone is. We're not measuring rare disease, so it means that it can mean that we might miss an opportunity to actually run a clinical trial, because we may not know how many people we have, where they are. We've heard through some of other work that we've done around workforce that we've had rare disease, a particular rare disease sort of area specialists turn down clinical trials arbitrarily because they don't have enough beds to put clinical trial to run the clinical trial. That just breaks my heart as a mum. I can't, that it's just beds. It's not the hard stuff. Sometimes I think we're actually going really well with all the hard stuff, but we haven't got some of the potentially easier stuff right. We have a workforce that is stretched beyond capacity and not funded properly. We have funding models within our healthcare system that don't properly fund the complex care or the multidisciplinary care that we need. That's not the hard, that shouldn't be the hard stuff, and that shouldn't be what's stopping us.
So I guess what you're saying is, if we get organised and we're using new technologies, digital technologies in health systems to find the data and really mine it and leverage the data, we can be ready. And I think that readiness is a great opportunity to sort of be leaders in biotechnology onshore, because if we don't, it's going to go offshore. And that opportunity is really creating jobs and creating knowledge, and it's beyond health. I mean, and so I'm very excited about it.
Well, that actually leads us perfectly into the first question that I was going to ask you from the Q&A. Of course, on Slido, the hashtag is MedConnect. Wayne's asking, what important genomics resources are we lacking in Australia? What's holding us back in rare diseases research? How can we collaborate better?
So I think it's about national expertise and collaboration and capacity and research together.
And data collection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I actually think probably the biggest, our biggest hurdle is that it's very hard to improve something if you don't measure it, and we don't measure rare diseases. We collect a lot of data. Our health system collects so much health data, but there's some real basic things like, I'm just gonna say it so it shouldn't upset anyone in the room, hopefully, but for example, I asked someone from the NHMRC, how much research funding goes to rare diseases? And they said, we don't know, because there's no tick box. Or when researchers put the application, there's no rare disease tick box. So there's some really basic things like that. There is no, we're also doing an audit of different rare disease registries, and we found out that there's probably around 75 some of them, but they all do it differently. But really heartbreakingly is that a fair amount of them don't do anything with the data that they collect. There's no reporting back. So I think what we need to do is, there is a lot of activity around there, but we need to actually go, well, come on, we need to start identifying best practice, and then we need to embed it within the system so that we're actually consistently replicating it. So that is my calls for us. I know I said ultimately I don't want to have to call for rare disease champions, but they are there. So let's identify them, and let's say, well, we're doing it, it's working here, and this is how we can lead the way for everything else.
So what I did with spinal muscular atrophy was, I think everywhere that people turned, they got the same message. Mm-hmm. And it was a unified voice. We need early diagnosis, we need access to effective therapies, and we need best multidisciplinary care. And I worked really hard myself and as a community with the consumers and with government and policymakers and with parents, so that everywhere that people turned and asked the question, there was a unified voice. So I think we need leadership, we need champions, we need to all be on the same page. As a university, what do we do well? Well, we do research and we do education. And when I listen to Nicole, I go, tick, tick. We can help with awareness, we can help with education. It's awareness in the community, but it's also in our medical curriculum, teaching rare diseases, teaching health professionals like we are in the Rarest Project, and creating a community of practice to get better care, because we can't do it alone. But then I think excellence in diagnosis through genomics technologies, but excellence in research to improve effective treatments as well.
We've got heaps of questions coming through, and I'd like to get through a few of them if we can. Someone's asking, how do we encourage pharmaceutical companies to prioritise rare disease?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I think one of the biggest things that we need to do with pharmaceutical companies is to make Australia a more attractive place, both for clinical trials, but also for early market. So at the moment, Australia is not an early market generally in rare disease treatments, because rightly or wrongly, it's seen as being quite a difficult market to get medicines approved. RVA sees that anecdotally. I often say I think HTA is around well, I guess at the heart of HTA is getting uncertainty down to a manageable or acceptable level. And as I said earlier, rare disease is all about uncertainty. One of the ways in which a HTA process will do that is to go through the process, send it back, do a resubmission, keep going around and around. But that takes a lot of time. It's not fit for purpose for rare disease, which is, as Michelle has explained, a lot of them are progressive and they get worse over time. So I think to get... the other thing I would say too, it's so important to focus on getting Australian patients on clinical trials, because it does make an already challenging HTA process a little bit easier, because it's much harder to take people off medicine than it is to give them. And I think, you know, it also then enables, as in the SMA case, it enables our Australian workforce to become familiar with the technology, to then also to be knowledgeable in the care. So I think what we need to do is to make, for pharmaceutical companies, it's important for them to have a higher level of confidence around Australia as a market. I do think that Australia is seen as quite a good option for clinical trials, so that's a strength, and I think we then need to keep building on that and then improve our HTA processes. And there is, to be fair, there is work going on in that at the moment. There's some very high level, there's the National Medicines Policy Review, there's the HTA review that's coming up. So I think there is an opportunity. It does sort of seem like everything's quite aligning, but we need to sort of, I guess, have enough knowledge of all of that to make sure that everything aligns with each other.
So my own experience with the SMA trial was, I knew that the trial had happened, a phase 1 trial with 14 patients in one centre. It was never going to be enough to get that therapy over the line and available to patients. And I really wanted to bring it to Australia because I feel that people need access to research and opportunities to participate. So we were horizon scanning and we approached the company. They weren't thinking about Australia. And we had a track record in SMA research, and we actually had a really good health system to provide excellent care and multidisciplinary care. And that's what convinced them to come here. And in fact, that was a very valuable experience in giving patients access, but also it then moved into phase 4 studies and real world studies to fill that gap between what happens when a clinical trial stops and then a therapy is funded. And we were able to have a compassionate supply of drug where we were able to get many more patients access, but we were able to fill all those data gaps that exist and that uncertainty about how does that therapy work in a broader population. And in fact, that data is valuable, and it's as valuable as a clinical trial. So I think increasing the visibility and the importance of real-world data and phase 4 data is actually really important in rare diseases because a clinical trial is conducted on a very small population, and that uncertainty makes it very hard for it to get rolled out into practice as well.
We are coming up very close to the end of the time, but a couple more questions. Simon's asking, can we properly investigate rare disease in Australia with our limited population? Do we have enough people?
Well, there's 2 million Australians living with a rare disease.
There you go, Simon.
We definitely can as a cumulative phenomenon. And I think it really does come down to the fact that a link nationally and internationally is imperative to really have access to expertise globally. It's a global priority.
Yeah. And a question that I'm sure you get a lot. Someone's asking, is there anything parents-to-be can do to prevent their children being born with a rare disease?
Well, there are. So one of the things that the previous minister brought in actually. There's screening. There's also in recent times potentially increased access to IVF and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. I'm very conscious as the non-doctor in the room saying all these long words, and I'm sure to get it wrong. But so yeah, there are a range of different screening and testing options.
So the example I gave of that really bad week of diagnoses, that actually led to us sitting down with Minister Hunt, with the family that was affected, Mackenzie Casella, and you might have heard of Mackenzie's mission. And in fact, there was a national research project that came out of that meeting, where 10,000 couples were offered access to genomic testing to look to see if they were at risk of having a child with a genetic rare disease that was considered debilitating, devastating. And if they were able to identify that risk, it gave the couples choice. And what those couples did with that information is different between various couples, but certainly some people, I heard that loud and clear in my clinic, you know, if we'd known sooner and we'd had a choice, that would have been really important.
And just very briefly, we've only got a minute to go, but a great question to round us off. What's your top Christmas wish to assist research and fast-track progress into rare diseases?
Okay, I can go.
Yeah.
All right. I've got a bit of a list. Okay, so
Santa's very busy, so you...
Centres of Excellence, a national rare disease registry, clinical trial and registry network. These are things that already exist in other places or in other countries, or there's precedent in other disease areas, but looking at that. And I think probably the biggest, I don't know, it's hard to pick a favourite, isn't it? But some of those nationally led infrastructure things. So, it's for us to be better for the system to start measuring rare disease and counting rare disease, so we can actually get some benchmarks and then really start improving and knowing where we're improving. And then probably the last little bit, because I think it's been a huge gap, and it came out through our work with the action plan, and we're starting to do some work around it, is around sort of a recognition of the need for mental health and wellbeing support, because I think, I'm just going to put that a plug there, because I think it is something that we often, that has been very much neglected. And as a rare disease mum, I know why, because you're too busy working, you're too busy managing the often life and death other stuff. But there's all that psychological impact on as well.
Michelle?
I would say centres of expertise.
Oh, yes.
And I think that will deliver three things. Excellence in diagnosis, but also the opportunity to participate in research to change the future, but also bringing the consumer voice to the heart of it and having consumers embedded in centres of expertise to really set the agenda and make sure that we're learning to fly the plane in the right way.
It's just a short wish list. Look, thank you so much to Nicole and Michelle for sharing your expertise. Thank you all for being part of this tonight.